Paranormal Encounters generated by AI. Like and subscribe. Story 1. Samantha had always wondered about the paranormal. She never really believed in ghosts or spirits. But she had to admit that the thought of communicating with those from the other side was intriguing, so when her uncle's old house became available for rent, she jumped at the chance to stay there for the summer. Upon arriving at the house, she started to get a strange feeling like she was being watched. She brushed it off as just being the wind but couldn't shake the feeling all night. The next day, Samantha decided to explore the house, and she quickly realized that someone else was staying there with her. The feeling of being watched had intensified, and there were times when she could hear whispers coming from inside the house. At times, Samantha felt like someone was touching her shoulders or playing with her hair. These were all things she couldn't explain, so she quickly started researching the house. As it turns out, there had been a family that had lived in the house over 100 years ago. The family had a young daughter that had passed away in the house. Samantha became obsessed with the little girl and began to read everything she could find about her. Sometimes, she would sit alone in the house and talk to the little girl, asking her if she was there or if she needed anything. One evening, while sitting alone in the living room, Samantha felt a cold draft and heard footsteps coming towards her. She wasn't alone anymore. Samantha's heart raced, and fear gripped her as the little girl stood before her. The little girl was not scary, though. She was friendly and warm. Samantha spent the rest of her summer talking to the little girl and uncovering more about her life. As summer turned into fall, it was time for Samantha to leave the house. As she packed up her things, she said goodbye to the little girl and promised to come back and visit. Samantha left the house and walked away, feeling happy and fulfilled from a summer of paranormal encounters. Story 2. One night, a woman named Heather was sleeping soundly in her bedroom when she was suddenly awoken by a strange noise. She sat up in bed and looked around, but everything seemed normal. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she tried to go back to sleep, she heard the noise again, a faint tapping sound coming from the wall. She got out of bed and walked over to the wall, pressing her ear against it to listen more closely. That's when she heard a whispering voice, too soft to make out the words. Heather was terrified and quickly left the room. But the strange occurrences continued. She would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, and objects would move on their own. She even saw a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of her eye. Heather eventually sought the help of a paranormal investigator, who conducted an investigation of the house. They discovered that the house was built on a Native American burial ground, and that the spirits of the deceased were restless and seeking revenge. The investigator performed a cleansing ritual, and the activity in the house subsided. Heather never experienced any paranormal encounters again, but she never forgot the feeling of terror and unease that she felt during that time. Story 3. The Johnson family had just moved into their new home in a quiet neighborhood. They were excited to start their new life in their dream house, and they brought along their beloved dog, Max. However, strange things began to happen soon after they moved in. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and they could hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. But the strangest occurrence was when they saw Max, who had recently passed away, walking around the house. At first, they were terrified by the ghostly image of their pet, but they soon realized that Max was not there to harm them. Instead, he seemed to be watching over them and protecting them from the other spirits in the house. The Johnsons tried to communicate with Max's ghost, and they discovered that he was trying to warn them about a malevolent spirit that had been haunting the house for years. They learned that the previous owner of the house had died in a tragic accident, and his spirit had never left. Max's ghost helped the family to identify where the malevolent spirit was in the house, and they were able to perform a cleansing ritual to get rid of it. The family never saw Max's ghost again, but they were grateful for his help in ridding the house of the malevolent spirit. From then on, the house was peaceful, and the Johnsons felt safe and secure in their home. They felt that Max's ghost had brought them comfort and protection during their time of need, and they would always remember him fondly. Story 4. Once upon a time, there was a couple named Jake and Lily. They had heard rumors about a haunted house on the edge of town. But they didn't believe in ghosts and decided to explore it anyway. As they entered the dark and cold mansion, they felt a chilling breeze and heard creaking sounds coming from the wooden floors. Suddenly, they saw a shadowy figure appear before them. The figure beckoned for them to follow and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Even though Jake and Lily were scared, they were also curious and followed the figure down the hall. As they followed the figure, they eventually reached a room with an old portrait hanging on the wall. The portrait was of a woman who looked like she was from the past. Suddenly, the woman's ghostly appearance appeared before them. She told them the story of how she had been wrongfully accused of a crime and had been hanged for it. She had been seeking revenge ever since. The couple was shocked, scared, and amazed all at the same time. They left the mansion and vowed to never return. From that day forward, they had a newfound respect for ghosts, and they never spoke of the haunted mansion again. Story 5. The dark shadow phenomenon is a common experience among paranormal enthusiasts, often referred to as shadow people. These dark figures are often seen as fleeting glimpses in the corner of one's vision, lurking in the peripheral view for a split second before disappearing. Some people have even reported the shadow people actually appearing to have their own consciousness and intent. One case I'm aware of involves a woman named Sarah, who had recently moved into an old, creaky house in the countryside. Her son was away at college, and her husband worked at the office for long hours. Despite being a small house, Sarah had trouble remembering the layout and finding her way around. The hallway to her bedroom was dimly lit, which constantly gave her the feeling of being watched. One night, as darkness engulfed the house, Sarah was headed to bed after long hours of binge-watching her favorite Netflix shows. As she was walking down the eerie hallway to her bedroom, she noticed a dark shadow flit across the wall that freaked her out. She dismissed it, thinking it was her mind playing tricks on her, and tried to fall asleep. Over the next few days, she kept noticing the same figure in the corner of her bedroom, vanishing as she turned on the lights. One night, as she was about to doze off, something grabbed her ankle. She jolted awake and saw the shadow person lurking at the edge of her bed. The next day, she decided to move out because she could no longer endure living alone with what seemed like a dark, unexplained entity sharing her living space. While the concept of shadow people still remains an object of research and debate among the paranormal community, people who claim to have experienced these sightings believe it's an indication of supernatural or spiritual phenomena that's difficult to explain using traditional scientific theories. Story 6. Jenny was a single mom of 2 toddlers who had moved into a new 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't long before the strange events began. Jenny noticed the front door opening and closing on its own several times a day. However, every time she checked, no one was there. She also constantly heard eerie whispering in her ear and strange sounds like footsteps and banging on the walls, but when she turned around, there was never anyone around. Late one evening, as she was putting her children to sleep, she heard the same whispering behind her ear. As she tucked her son in, she turned sharply. But this time around, she saw the outline of a shadowy figure standing behind her. The hairs on the back of her neck rose in warning. Fear gripped her, and she saw that the figure had started moving towards her. As the figure moved closer, Jenny felt a chill through her spine and terror grow in her chest. She did all she could to grab the kids and bolt outside the house, leaving behind everything. That night, she decided she could no longer live in the apartment. Believing the place was seriously haunted, she didn't wait around to investigate what it was. She just packed up her belongings and left that very night. To this day, Jenny believes it was a malevolent ghost that was attached to her apartment, and she's thankful that nothing more sinister happened. Story 7. On the outskirts of London, there was a grand apartment building that proclaimed modernity and luxurious living. It was the haunt of fashionable people and young professionals who worked in downtown London. Roommates Laura, Haley, and Bethany had moved into the posh apartment, hoping to have a good time this summer. The large windows overlooked the city streets, which were bustling with traffic and nightlife. The apartment got plenty of sunlight, but during the nights, the place took on a sinister aspect, and Laura was unnerved by a haunting sight that they experienced every day. Each night, they would see a ghostly figure out of the windows. It was a young woman with swirling hair in a transparent gown. But it wasn't until the night of June 20th that things turned dark. Daphne was in the kitchen, cooking a meal. Haley was in the bathroom, straightening her hair, while Laura was on the couch, reading a novel. Suddenly, the temperature took a plunge, and the lighting dimmed without any reason. The noise of footsteps filled the apartment. The girls were paralyzed by fear as they saw the ghostly figure moving across the room. Her hair swayed, her gown murmured, and her eyes glowed with an unknown force. She was nothing like anything they had ever seen before. They couldn't move or scream as the ghostly figure approached them. The roommates could hear her whispering sorrowfully, and all at once, the lights turned to full brightness, the windows slammed shut, and the air conditioner shuddered to a stop. From that day on, the girls never dared to stay awake overnight and moved out soon after. London residents still whisper stories about the 3 roommates who lived in the haunted apartment of the Fancy Building. Story 8. Dolly and her 10-month-old baby had recently moved into a small apartment on the north side of Chicago. The previous tenant had left no mention of any paranormal activity to the landlord, and the price was right, so Dolly signed the lease without a second thought. But soon after moving in, Dolly started to experience strange things happening in the apartment. Doors would open and shut inexplicably, and she would hear muffled footsteps when no one else was home. But the weirdest thing was that her baby always seemed to be scared and cried incessantly. Despite her best efforts to soothe him, one night, Dolly was awakened by her baby's cries and went to check on him in his crib. As she entered the nursery, she saw a shadow moving past the window and heard the front door slam shut. When she turned on the light, nobody was there. But her baby was terrified, and she had never heard him cry so hard. Days went by, and Dolly had become increasingly sleep-deprived and nervous. Her emotions were really on the edge. The activity slowed down, and the actual source of the paranormal activity was thought to be over for now. One night, when Dolly and her son were alone in the apartment, she heard someone calling out her name. The voice seemed to be coming from the other side of the bedroom, but no one was there. The baby was also looking and cooing in that direction. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut, and the lights went out. When Dolly tentatively tried to open the door, she discovered that it had been locked from the outside. They were trapped inside, with whatever force had been making the noises and scaring her baby. She managed to get the door open after a while, and nothing was there. She had had enough by this point. So the very next day, she packed up all her daughter's belongings and left the apartment. She never looked back. Thanks for listening, guys. Check out my other videos.